Hello, I'm Andy O'Rourke, and we're back with another video here. Today, we're going into an NC State deep dive, preparing for that Week 0 matchup against Virginia. We're going to cover their offense, their defense, and everything in between. So stay tuned as we get right into this video. Diving into the Wolfpack, we are going to start with their coaching staff. Their head coach is Dave Doeren. Dave Doeren's entering his 13th season with the staff. And he's had a pretty great tenure here. 61.4% winning percentage in his career, a 95-70 record since coming to NC State. And when he was at Northern Illinois, he only lost 4 times with a 23-4 record. So this guy's a proven winner. And last year, he went 7-5 during the regular season with a bowl game win over Memphis. And that Memphis game, they won 31-7 to really put the cherry on top to what was overall a successful season, but I think they want a little bit more. They want a taste of an ACC championship or a berth in the college football playoffs because they weren't too far. University of Virginia finished this season as the 19th team ranked in the nation, and they're facing off with them here in Week 0. And last year, they beat them in Week 2. So in their second week, they beat what ended up being the 19th ranked team in the nation. They think they can build that. The final score was 35-31. So this team was a competitive ball club, but a lot of ups and downs throughout the season. They don't have any change at the coordinator positions. They have Kurt Ruper as their offensive coordinator and DJ Elliott. We'll dive more into those guys' schemes as the video goes on, but not too much turnover. Without further ado, let's get into their arrivals and departures. Diving into NC State's arrivals and departures, there are a lot of players gone. We have over 65% of their targets leaving the building and 2,300 offensive line snaps, headlined by Jarcarius Peak, Jalen Grant at center, both of them playing about 850 snaps last year. Staples of the offensive line that are now gone. They're going to lose Noah Rogers at wide receiver, and Justin Jolly, their stud tight end. He's going to leave for the NFL draft, and he was a guy I really liked. You know, not the most consistent player, but man, he was a handful after the catch. He had 74 targets for 7 touchdowns last year. They're also going to lose their leading rusher from last year, Hollywood Smothers, but I think they got backs that can replace them pretty decently. Overall, 3 tight ends leaving this roster. That's a lot of turnover. And when you look for tendencies on a team, tight ends tend to tell a lot of that story. Losing those 3 guys leaves a little bit of question marks on how they're going to use the newcomers, what guys at tight ends are going to do what, who's going to fill that role of Justin Jolly because he was such a large part of this offense. Looking into who they bring in, they're going to bring in Tyron Warren from Alcorn State. He's expected to play a pretty decent role in this receiving room. They're going to bring in a new center coming from Texas in Daniel Cruz. They're going to bring in a running back from UNC, Davion Goose. And Hunter Province from Montana State is going to help round out this tight end room. First player we're diving into here is going to be C.J. Bailey, their quarterback. Bailey is a guy that a lot of people think he has some first-round draft hype around entering the season. Some people say, man, he might be the next quarterback off the board after Dante Moore and Arch Manning. Other people say, man, I haven't seen it yet. I need to see a little bit more. And I think I fall somewhere in the middle of those camps. I think he's an extraordinarily talented player. Definitely worthy of some first-round hype, but a little bit of stuff to still work on in the game. He's an experienced starter. Last year was a little bit of his down year. I remember when I was at Stanford, we played him in his freshman season, and he was tearing up the ACC. You know, you get a little bit of film on a guy, you get a little bit of a sophomore slump, but still an extraordinary player, a guy I'm really excited to watch entering this season. Last year, he had a 65.1 completion percentage, threw for over 3,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. Took a decent amount of sacks, 21 sacks, but he can scramble a bit. 32 scrambles, 13 big-time throws, but this is where the issues arise. 17 turnover-worthy throws across 13 games. You can't have that. Putting the ball a little bit in harm's way. What he struggled with last year, cover 3 family caused him a lot of problems, and man under. Cover 3 was a high-volume look, but he only had a 52.7 PFF grade. Say what you will about PFF grade, 52.7 is not really you want to be, especially when cover 3 is the bread and butter for most defenses. He had 7 yards per attempt, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, and 5 turnover-worthy plays against cover 3. That caused him quite a bit of problems this year. But he really dominated against cover 0, which is going to be interesting because his numbers overall under pressure weren't great. But when he was able to identify the blitz, he was really effective. he had a 88.1 PFF grade. Again, say what you will about PFF grade, but if you got an 88.1 PFF grade, you're in really good shape. You are dominating your competition. You're a very good player. He went 11 for 17 for 140 yards and 8 touchdowns against 19 dropbacks against cover 0. So he crushed cover 0. I mean, 8 of your 24 touchdowns coming against one coverage, that's only 19 dropbacks. I'd stay out of cover 0 against Bailey. When he identifies the blitz, he can get that ball out fast. He also was pretty solid against cover 6, 85 PFF grade, 10.1 yards per attempt. So he crushed these coverages, was really dominant against those. I'd want to stay away from those at all possible. Under pressure, though, is where he had his problems. He was pressured on 32.4% of his dropbacks, and 8 of his 9 interceptions came when he was under pressure. Simply put, he has to make better decisions under pressure if NC State's going to have a chance at the college football playoffs and winning the ACC. He took 21 sacks under pressure and had 14 throwaways. So again, taking too many sacks, you want to see a little bit more of his throwaways. So under pressure, he was either sacked 21 times out of 35 of those attempts. Either you got to throw the ball away more. You can't keep taking those pressure. But when he was kept clean, he was dominant. If you keep this guy clean, only 1 interception all year from a clean pocket, a 73% completion percentage. He's very dominant from a clean pocket, but you got to see him improve from under pressure. Diving into their running back room, Jaden Scott, number 4. This is a big, powerful back, 5'10", 225 pounds. The guy gets after it, and he will run you over. Really tough guy to tackle. Not a guy you want to see late in the fourth quarter. He was the number 2 back last year, but I think he's going to fit into Hollywood Smothers' role just fine. I don't think you're going to miss too much of a beat with him. He was really productive on only 106 carries. He had nearly 600 yards for 5.65 yards per attempt and a 15.1 explosive play percentage. So real dominant, explosive back. He forced missed tackles on 32% of his attempts. He also added 17 catches on 20 targets for 140 yards. So he's a threat in the receiving game. You can't count him out. He struggled a little bit in pass protection. And what was really interesting is they used him a lot in their 12 personnel looks. He made up the majority of their 12 personnel looks, where Smothers played predominantly in their 11P looks and not a lot else. So he really came in a package player, could add a little bit in the receiving game. He struggled a little bit as a blocker, but overall we're getting a really solid back. He was excelled greatly on zone concepts. Inside zone, 6.6 yards per attempt. Outside zone, 5.9. And then counter, 5.8, which isn't zone. It is a gap scheme. And, inside zone and counter really marry well together. You can make the backside of counter feel like inside zone. You can make the front side of counter feel like the backside of inside zone, which really helps that run scheme. So those two marry up very well together. But the rest of the gap scheme, in particular power, only 1.7 yards per attempt. So really struggled in that area, albeit he only had 3 power reps. So it wasn't a huge sample size, but he didn't show great in those. So small sample size, did he really struggle with power, or was it just a small sample size? I guess we'll see this year with a larger volume. He's a real 3-down back. You can use him in all aspects of the game, but again, as I mentioned earlier, his weakness was pass protection a little bit. You'd like to see some improvement in that area. Being 5'10", 225, I don't think that's going to be a massive problem for him moving forward. Next player we're going to dive into here today is their starting tight end, at least the projected one, number 82, Preston Douglas. He's a redshirt sophomore. He played the most snaps last year out of players returning. Maybe Hunter Providence takes this in as he transfers in from Montana, but we'll have to see, right? It's a real open room with all the guys they had transfer out or leave for the draft. So the tight end room, wide open, but I think Douglas, being that he had the most production last year out of the returners, projects as the starter. He had 52 snaps across 5 games, only 2 targets all season, 1 reception for 18 yards. So it hadn't shown much in the receiving room, but you also had Justin Jolly there. So who are you going to throw the ball to? Douglas or Jolly? I'm throwing that ball to Jolly all day. And he was pretty solid in his run blocking reps and pass protection. He had a 74.2 pass protection grade. Again, PFF grade, so put what stock you will in it, small sample size, but he didn't show to be a liability at all in the run game or from a blocking aspect. So I don't think you got to really worry about that. He was used a lot in 11 personnel, 35% of his snaps coming in that. 13 personnel, he was that third tight end coming in, 33% of his snaps came there. So pretty even split between 11 and 13. And then 12 personnel, only 28% of snaps were played there. Then mixed in 4% in other personnel groupings. Hunter Providence also coming in. I think he has a chance to start as well as he comes in from Montana State. He is a redshirt freshman. We'll see how they use him. He'll at least be that number 2 tight end for them. As we look at Ian Flint, he only played 5 snaps. Wasn't overly productive, but, small sample size. We'll see how he grades out the rest of the season, what he ends up doing for this team. That kind of rounds out that tight end room. Again, a lot of turnover. Will be interesting to see how these guys are going to end up being used, what roles they fit into this offense. As you look into the targets that they're losing this year, certainly a lot gone. You have their top 4 target getters leaving this year, leaving Keenan, Jackson, and Hoffman to really step into bigger roles, each of them with 48 and 39 targets last season. You're going to need to see a lot more of a step up from these guys. With all this production loss, will be interesting to see how their roles change and evolve in this offense. As we dive into their offensive personnel usage, what's really interesting is how heavy they use 11 personnel throughout the season until we get a little bit later. Memphis and Georgia Tech, you see a little bit of a drop. Well, Georgia Tech, you see a massive drop. Pretty consistently throughout the whole year, you have between 70 and 80% 11 personnel usage. However, in the Georgia Tech game, it drops down to 48%. 12 personnel jumps up to 30%. And they get the win in that game against what was a really good Georgia Tech game led by Haynes King. If you saw the preseason game, we all know his name now. If you didn't know it before, he dominated for the Panthers, getting the win in that preseason game. He looked great. But they move into more of a 12 personnel attack in that game, and it was very successful for them. They walk out with the win. It'd be a curious game to dive into to see, hey, was this a matchup-driven thing where they thought they had the advantage in the run game, or was there a certain defensive look that Georgia Tech was given that made them change it up? So interesting look there at that personnel usage throughout the season with that massive drop against Notre Dame and Georgia Tech. What caused it? Why'd they do it? Not sure, but very interesting look there. Looking at their 11 personnel attack. In the run game, it's very heavy outside zone, inside zone, and counter. What you see with a lot of Shanahan schemes, it's kind of became the bread and butter of a lot of offenses. And as I mentioned earlier, counter pairs up very well with those, and they ran a very efficient rushing attack, especially with the inside zone. 7.3 yards per attempt in 11 personnel. Looking at their 11 personnel pass game, drop back heavy, but not overly effective, only 5.9 yards per attempt. Whereas you jump into that play action game, only 59 attempts out of 11 personnel there, but 10.8 yards per attempt. So 14% of their dropbacks, uber effective. I'd be interested to see if they use a little bit more play action attack here entering this season with how effective it was last year out of those 11 personnel looks. Yards per attempt on their screens were only 5.1. Wasn't a huge part of their offense, but up there with the play action percentage. 11% of their 11% screen game, 14% play action game, 71% play action just coming out of pure drop back pass. They did not leave their backs in protection a whole bunch. They were out on routes roughly about 70% of the time. Scott and Fields left in the least amount. Smothers, I think they trusted the most in pass protection. He was there 30% of the time. Scott only 23%, and Fields down to 12%. So when Fields was in the game, that was a pretty big, hey, he's out on routes, tell if it's pass. They used the tight ends quite a bit in pass blocking. Hardy, 40% of his snaps were spent in pass protection versus Jolly only 29%, and Daniels up to 36%. So tight ends used heavy in pass protection out of these 11P looks where the backs were more out on routes. As we dive into this 12 personnel tendencies, you see Jaden Scott getting a lot of carries here compared to Hollywood Smothers. Jaden Scott saw 57% of the snaps. Hollywood Smothers only 35%, and then Darius Johnson got mixed in with 8%. The tight ends, they'd move around quite a bit, but Hardy saw the overwhelming amount of their snaps out of 12 personnel, and he was predominantly lined up in line 49, but they moved him around a little bit. You got 44% of the snaps in the slot, 10 snaps out wide, and Jolly was also mixed in there. They really moved him around quite a bit. In line, out wide, kind of mixed evenly, not too much in the slot. Their snaps percentage, Hardy, 48%. Dante Daniels, 31, and Justin Jolly, only 21% of 12 personnel snaps. They didn't use 10 personnel a whole bunch, but when they did, it was a massive pass indicator, as it is for most teams. Only 3 rushing attempts out of 10 personnel. 2 of them were outside zone. Inside zone was 1 attempt. They lost some yardage on that, but outside zone, very effective for them. 2 attempts, 7.5 yards per carry, and their drop back percentage was super high. You didn't see any play action. They mixed in a little bit of screens. 92% of their passing attempts out of 10 personnel were the drop back pass. And screens, only 2 attempts for about 6 yards per attempt. Their drop back pass game, uber effective, 12.1 yards per attempt. Jumping into some formational tendencies for this offense. Slot. Some people call it double twins, gun weak. They ran a lot of hitches out of this. 12 hitches charted across 47 snaps. A lot of drop back pass. 85% of their plays out of this were drop back pass. Only 5% play action with 2% screen and 8% run. Looking at what runs they called out of this, they ran a whole bunch of draws out of this. That was their top run concept here. Their hash tendencies, there weren't a lot of meaningful changes here. It was pretty evenly divided up. And when you looked at it across down and distances, not a whole bunch of play calling change. First, second, third down, this was a pass formation, 90% pass out of it. So you didn't really have to worry about changing it up. You see this formation, you knew pass was coming. Hey, sorry to interrupt. Quick little ad read here. This video is brought to you by 4th Down AI. 4th Down AI delivers faster, quicker, and more accurate insights for teams from the NFL all the way down to Division III. 4th Down AI links to video and automates scouting reports that previously took tens of hours for coaches, now done in a matter of minutes. Get back to what you want to do as a coach. Coach, spend less time on data and more time game planning. 4th Down AI, faster, quicker, better. Their next most used formation was Trey open, gun strong. Out of this, they run a lot of drags. 3 out of their 18 charted targets were drags. They really like to go to that here. And it was a 57% run formation, so pretty heavy run tendency, in particular from the right hash. 71% of their runs came on the right hash, only 52% on the left and 43% middle. So very heavy run tendency when you get to the right hash. And it's almost exclusively used on early down. So first and second down, third down only accounted for 3 of their snaps using this formation. A lot of inside zone from this encounter, a really downhill rushing attack, and not a lot of outside zone from it. When we move to trips open, gun strong, when there's no motion, it's a pretty balanced attack overall. 54% run, 29% drop back pass, 9% play action, 9% screen across 35 reps. What's interesting here, though, is their first and second down flip. And first and second down, 70% run. But when you move to third down, it was very pass heavy, 75% pass. So you see a massive change in their play calling. So you look at the formation as a whole, balanced attack, but first and second down, a completely different world versus third down, where third down, you're getting a lot of passes. First, second down, very run heavy. You're going to get a lot of outside zone, 53% of their reps on this that were runs. Outside zone. Counter accounted for 32. Then you had 16% other reps across this formation. Moving on to slot, gun strong. You see a little bit of a difference from slot, gun weak, where 84% drop back pass, 13% run. That's down from the 90+% we saw. All 5 of their runs came from the left hash or middle, though. So if you're on that right hash, green light to go rush the pass. The right hash was all pass for them. First and second down was only 77% pass. So you see a lot more runs there. And third down was 100% pass out of this formation. So you get a little bit of a difference. This is when there's no motion, what they're running out of it. They ran counter, outside zone, and inside zone. So their typical bread and butter plays out of this. And a little bit of screens too, only 3%. A little bit of a more diverse menu here from when it's slot, gun strong. A formation in particular that this Virginia defense struggled with was Trey open, gun strong. 14 snaps against it when power was ran, and they had a 78% success rate. Traditionally, when they see this front, they're going to be in an under front, and under fronts yielded an 83% success rate against power. So look to that being a key. Do they mix in this formation, run a little bit more power, or do they go with the counter run game a little bit more? I definitely could see that entering the formation breakdown, how they're going to attack this defense. definitely an exploit. Moving into trips, open gun strong, inside zone, they really struggled with. So these downhill runs have caused them a lot of problems. I think these two options with these formations could cause them a significant amount of problems. Starting off with NC State's defense, we're going to look at how they use their personnel. This is predominantly going to be a nickel team. They're going to get into a little bit of base personnel against 12, but even then, nickel's still at 37%. What you really notice is where it changes by field zone. When they got a team backed up, it's about a 50-50 split. When they're on their goal line, it's only 42% nickel. As we get closer to midfield, that rate of nickel goes up. So as you enter that shot zone, again, they're going to be a little bit lighter, alerting shots, want to be able to stop the pass. They'll get a little bit heavier with their different areas of the field, especially as you get closer to that goal line. So that's where you really notice the changes in what they're using personnel-wise. 10 personnel was 95% nickel. You're going to mix in a little bit of dime, a little bit higher usage of dime than you see for most teams. So it's going to really go nickel and dime as their go-tos. And then with a mix in when you get heavier personnel of that base personnel grouping. When we look at the fronts that they use, they're predominantly a 4-down team. You're going to get a lot of over and under fronts and with a changeup of odd. Looking at the coverage families, though, like most teams, they're going to live in cover 3, 36% of their snaps, but a decent amount of variance, right? You go from cover 3 at 36, cover 4, 24, cover 1, 21, and then even some cover 2 at 10 and 0 at 5%. So a little bit of diversity in these coverage families. They'll mix things up. You're not getting a whole bunch of disguise looks from them, but a healthy menu of coverages that you're going to see and that you have to prepare for throughout the week. Their front usages also vary changed by field zone. As you get close to that goal line, they're hardly using any of their over fronts. Most of that changes to odd fronts as we get down into this. You're going to see over front really peak as we get to that middle of the field. That's what they like there. What's also interesting, though, is as you get to the coming out zone, right, around that 30-yard line, 25-yard line, you also see that drop. So when you get a kickoff return or, those first plays after a half, that front changes drastically. And as you get more into those traditional areas of the field when the drive's moving, that's when you're going to see more even front stuff out of that odd personnel. And as you get closer to those goal lines, similar to when I talked about where they're calling stuff personnel-wise, when they get in that base stuff, you're going to see a lot more odd fronts, and that's what you're going to have to prepare for in those areas of the field. As we look at their wide over coverages, what are they pairing with this front? It's a lot of cover 3. 65% of their snaps come from a single high look. Not a huge disguise team, which is interesting because when they go cover 1, very blitz heavy. And when you look at the cover 4 structure, not blitz heavy at all, and you're not getting a whole bunch of disguise. So you can get a good idea of what they're calling in the pre-snap look. And that blitz rate is up to 31.7% here. So you get that cover 1 tell, you should be anticipating some type of pressure coming at you, especially when they come from this front alignment. When they give you an under front, you get way more cover 3 and cover 4, pretty much an even balance, a lot more zone defense. Cover 1 drops down to 17%. You'll get the change up of cover 2. So 1 and 2 at 17, 14%, those are pretty even. Really a very different coverage world that you're getting. The blitz rate goes way down than what you saw from the over front. The under front, definitely much more of a coverage and fundamentally sound one, right? Not really looking to create negatives with the blitz, but we're going to play you straight up, play good fundamental football. That's what you're really going to get here. A lot of zone eyes. They're going to look to stop that pass play, traditional defense, conservative, gap fitting against the run. That's what you're going to see when you get an under front. As you get into the odd front, you're going to see a lot more blitzing. 42%, that's a crazy number. So odd, very heavy pressure rate. They're bringing some type of blitz, but it's predominantly cover 4. 29% of snaps are ran with a cover 4 defense behind it. Then you get 3 and 1, much more of a balance there, and those ones pair very well together. You keep that same disguise, that single high look, and those are at 19% respectively. You get a bit of cover 0 also at 15%, and that's also very high. So If it's not 4, you're getting 0, 1, and 3. And 0 can pair up really well with 4 because you can have a similar disguise. You can make it look like a 2 high shell, line up the same way, run a 0 pressure behind it. So I really like the front and coverage marriage between these. I think it could make it a very difficult front to coverage marriage identification with them. And it's interesting because they run these mostly near the goal line on either side of the field. So when they have a team backed up or when they are in their own red zone, you're getting a lot more of these same coverage looks, a little bit more, I would say arguably a little bit more exotic, where you don't exactly know what's coming, where when you were in the over and under world, a lot more predictable with what they were doing. As we look at what this Virginia defense struggled with, I think this offense can pretty much stick to their normal attack. But what's interesting is when you get into the over fronts, they really struggled with power. Only 12 attempts on the season for 5.7 yards per carry, but an 83% successful run rate. So it's been a really a problem run for Virginia when they're in their over front world. Draws had a bit of success against them, 9.3 yards per carry, but only a 45% success rate. But again, in that underfront world, also struggled with power, 62% success rate, 4.8 yards per carry. But when you get into that nitty-gritty down and distance, they've really struggled against power, 62% success rate, even against underfronts. Counter was very successful against pretty much every front. So as you look at this, they really struggled with a little bit more gap scheme. Outside zone, still successful against them. 50% success rate, 6.6 yards per carry. But these gap scheme runs have yielded very successful runs overall, putting people in position to get first down, staying ahead of the change. I would be interesting to see if when you enter this game, do they run a lot of counter? Because they already run that a pretty high amount. Outside zone, inside zone were their bread and butter. But as you look at what this Virginia defense struggled with, it was gap scheme. And that will sum up our NC State deep dive. Let me know thoughts, comments, concerns. Who do you think wins this game? What things would you exploit as a coordinator on either side of the ball for these teams? Hopefully we have time to do a little bit more of a deep dive into Virginia for our next deep dive. But that'll cover it all for today. Like, comment, subscribe. Thank you very much.